So yes, today we had the first inaugural address by the new incoming, well, already there, Lai Ching-te administration, who's going to reign as president of Taiwan for the next 4 years. And certainly a much watched speech today. And I think he showed very clear awareness that he's being watched internationally. So you see that Lai Ching-te really hit the ground running with his opening section of his remark, where he talked about essentially, I guess, three broad things: political status quo, democracy, and alignment issues. And from the very beginning, he tells people that he's elected according and will govern according to the ROC, that's Republic of China Constitution, ROC being the official name of Taiwan at the moment. He also said that his coming to power is a result of the democratic will of the Taiwanese voters. I think that's how he's going about. With ROC, he's talking about he's holding on to stability, that he has no immediate plans to change the political status of Taiwan, so to speak. When he talk about he's here as a result of the exercise of democratic will of the Taiwanese voters, he's highlighting a major sort of difference between the two sides of Taiwan Strait, namely Taiwan and Beijing. He also, lastly, he add one more line about how Taiwan is going to be a highlight of quote unquote global chain of democracies. I think that's him signaling Taiwan's continued strategic alignment under him, namely with the side of democracies, namely going to be pursuing closer relations between Taiwan and US as well as other like-minded democratic partners. More specifically, I think when it comes to cross-strait relations, he's talking about largely similar theme we saw before. He talked about the four commitments, which came out of his predecessor, President Tsai's 2021 National Day speech. He talked about also the four pillars of peace, something we saw him writing about in his mid-2023 op-ed to the Wall Street Journal. What are some key elements? Key elements, number one, peace through strength. He's talking about how continue deepening relations with like-minded democracies, continue shoring up of Taiwan's economic security and building Taiwan's deterrence are going to be the most surefire guarantee of Taiwan's continued security. He made one other remark about how he thinks that that accommodationism towards Beijing essentially is not going to be a very effective way to protect Taiwan. He had one line about how no amount of concession Taiwan may make would meaningfully change Beijing's ambition and designs towards Taiwan. So essentially, playing nice to Beijing may buy Taiwan some time, but that's all it is, if that. So peace restraint, number one. Number two, dialogue with Beijing on that issue. I think his general attitude is one of conditional yes. He's saying, according to his fourth pillar, from his so-called four pillars of peace, he's talking about how under him, Taiwan will exercise principled and stable leadership on cross-strait relations. Principled meaning that Taiwan will not be making the kind of concessions that Beijing may want. Leadership means that Taiwan under him will be open to dialogue between Beijing and Taiwan. However, it will not be happening. Dialogue will not be happening under the preconditions unilaterally dictated to by Beijing. And instead, he proposed Taiwan's own formula for the rightful conditions under which dialogue should take place, namely that talks need to take place on the basis of equality and mutual respect between the two sides. So I think these are the broader messages he's trying to tell people, that he's committed to the status quo. He's taken clear alignment with democracies. And when it comes to defense, it will be peace through strength rather than diplomatic or other political concessions. And lastly, when it comes to dialogue, Taiwan's door is always open, but they need to find the right atmosphere for it, and namely that both sides need to see each other as peers and willing to talk to each other as equals, rather than as giving Beijing the right to unilaterally set preconditions. So that's my time.
Thanks very much, Wendy. And now I'm going to throw to Elizabeth for some opening remarks.
Hi, Elizabeth Alaris here. I'm non-resident senior fellow at Lanny Cancel Global China Hub. I'm over here near Washington, and so I will direct, my comments to the view from Washington, and particularly, Taiwan's relations, with Washington. I anticipate that President Lai will come out of the gate strong to strengthen relations with the United States. Certainly he has his Vice President, Bi Kim Xiao, as an asset. She will be instrumental, having been the former ambassador from Taiwan to Washington. Taiwan, as you know, enjoys very good relations with Congress as well as with the White House. President Biden had said on several occasions that the U.S. would militarily defend Taiwan. And, the U.S. has an election coming up in November. And right now, polls are indicating it could be either Biden or Trump. And I know some people are skittish about Trump. However, under the Trump administration, we saw a flurry, actually the most congressional legislation on protecting Taiwan. They were, I would say in the last 6 years, Trump and Biden administrations, there's been 7 to 10 pieces of legislation, that is joint resolutions, acts, other things, laws, that have been directed to protecting Taiwan. I anticipate that will continue. Congress is very defensive of Taiwan. It is willing to sell, most of the arms that Taiwan seeks. And that, again, the White House, I anticipate will still, regardless of some of the rhetoric, will still seek good relations with Taiwan. And as far as Taiwan officials coming over to Washington, we will, very soon, I'm sure, anticipate seeing people coming over to strengthen and deepen those ties.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And finally, we'll turn to Lev.
Thank you so much, Atlantic Council, for putting this on. I think if there's one thing that William Lai has tried to sell to the world for the last 2.5 years is that he is going to beat Tsai Ing-wen 2.0. And I think his speech today really kind of cements that selling point. So much of what we heard today was not new. I think pretty much every major theme that William Lai touched on is something that the DPP under Tsai has really begun to put forward over the last 8 years. And most importantly, there's always this air of skepticism still from some about William Lai secretly wanting to, go against the status quo, and that in his heart of hearts, he secretly has these pro-independence leanings. And I think there's enough structural reasons at this point, combined with today's speech, that really show that that's not going to happen. So first of all, William Lai knows that public opinion in Taiwan, based off of decades of public opinion survey data, that people in Taiwan don't want to change the status quo. And that if he was to enact any sort of change to the status quo, it would be electoral suicide for him and his party. Two, the legislative yuan is in chaos in Taiwan right now, which means that even if he wants to pass any major legislation, it's literally impossible. And finally, he knows that America does not want him to cross any red lines or become more provocative than he has to. All of that was reflected in today's speech. And whether or not in his heart of hearts he has some personal opinion about the future of Taiwan, because of these structural conditions, I think we're going to see a very stable Lai administration that does not that does not stray too far from what Tsai has put forth for the last 8 years. However, it is worth noting that depending on who does win in the United States this fall, that there is major potential for change in East Asia, even though under the last Trump administration, there were those in the administration that did good work on Taiwan. None of those people are likely to return to a second Trump administration, especially, good folks like Matt Pottinger, whose bridges have been burned with Donald Trump, that a Donald Trump presidency would really sort of bring a new level of uncertainty to the region. And so even though we're able to be optimistic for the William Lai administration from now until November, I think really what we have to focus on is what happens in the United States following that. I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Lev. And I'd like to just to start to follow up on some of that. I mean, Lai may be looking to be Tsai 2.0, but he's domestically and politically not facing a Tsai 2.0 situation. As we know, the DPP didn't win the majority in the legislative yuan this time around, a first in 8 years, and now they're facing off against this KMT TPP alliance there. When we saw Han Guoyu, a former KMT presidential nominee, was in February chosen as a speaker. I mean, there's a handful of factors there that are going to make things very, very challenging for him. So what is his potential to actually push forward policy in line with, the wants of the DPP there?
As of now, practically zero. So first of all, in William Lai's speech today, he put the need for unity and coming together by parties as the first major point of his speech, which was the correct decision because it is currently the biggest problem in Taiwan. Nothing is going to happen productively in the legislative yuan until parties begin to work together. Instead, we're going to, for those who did not know, there was a major brawl in Taiwan's legislative yuan last week. And I don't think that's going to be the last one we see under the Lai administration, because the DPP, who does not have a majority in the legislative yuan, is currently being stared down the barrel of the gun of the TPP and the KMT, who have decided that their main goal in the legislative yuan is to make life more difficult for the DPP. And what that's going to lead to is the DPP's inability to sort of push any agenda. William Lai himself is going to face a very tough time trying to provide any deliverables for Taiwanese voters. As of now, the KMT and the TPP have no incentive to work with the DPP. They just had a very successful election, and they are feeling very confident in their ability to sort of dictate the pacing and the tone of the legislative yuan. The TPP, the third party that has this sort of kingmaker position with their 8 legislators, has especially shown their true colors during the very first vote in which the Speaker of the Legislative Yuan was elected. The TPP just walked out of the vote. And I think that really was indicative of how they feel about how they want to present themselves and how much they want to play along in Taiwan's legislature. So William Lai is going to have a really tough time passing policy. The DPP is going to have a really tough time passing policy. And how that's going to translate into future electoral success as we think about, say, the 2026 local elections, or let alone the 2028 next national elections, William Lai has his hands full. And even though with major issues like foreign policy, cross-strait relations, he's able to set the tone himself when it comes to any sort of domestic agenda. William Lai is currently having to convince all parties to work together, which in Taiwanese politics, just like American politics, is really difficult.
Thanks, Lev. And probably the best manifestation of that we saw on Friday when a literal fistfight broke out between lawmakers of the KMT, the TPP and the DPP over there. Just a really quick follow-up question. What do you make of the loss of the youth vote and what that means for setting an agenda?
Yeah, so it's a good question because we're all very interested in what the youth vote really represents. A lot of my work this last semester, I've been conducting focus groups with college students all over Taiwan for the last 6 months to try to really understand this youth vote. And it's worth keeping in mind because a lot of people think that the reason the TPP did so well was because of the youth vote. We know that just from demographics, there's about 900,000, less than 1 million youth votes in Taiwan. And if you look at how many votes Ko Wen-je received, he received 2.6 million votes, which means that a lot of people who voted for Ko Wen-je were not young voters. That's also assuming that every young voter voted for Ko, which I don't think is true. Which means even though there's sort of this disproportionate attention paid to the youth vote and its relationship with the TPP and Ko Wen-je, there's far more voters that are becoming sympathetic to the TPP. I was just at the TPP's rally on Sunday to observe what their framing and messaging was, and there were a heck of a lot of different generations being represented there, where I think we have to sort of expand our understanding of the aggrieved Taiwanese voter to not just be young people, although young people are certainly not very happy with the political climate here at the moment.
Thanks, Lev. And turning to Wen-ti, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into some of the things you said in your opening remarks. So obviously in Lai's speech today, he, not very surprisingly, called for Beijing to stop threatening the island. Beijing in turn responded that Lai was sending very dangerous signals and called the situation grim and complex. It's no secret they see Lai as a dangerous separatist. but more broadly, I mean, how should we view the future of cross-strait relations under Lai? I mean, what are the big factors, the big issues that Lai will face in the presidency, and perhaps how do they differ from the last 4 years?
Right. So the most straightforward point is, as mentioned before, that this will be the first time in a long time when you have separation of powers, essentially, in Taiwan's government, when the executive and the legislative belong to two different parties. Those are going to create complications, I think, both in terms of enabling or disabling Taiwan to negotiate with Beijing from the position of strength. It may also create some complications in terms of Taiwan's attempt to deepen cooperation with other like-minded partners and friends as well. U.S. arms sales, for example, those are kind of things that require major budget to be passed in the parliament to enable to speed up. And with opposition-controlled parliament, when at the time when there's rising anti-establishment sentiment, just like there is around many other corners of the world, I think one natural way to frame it for the opposition is to say that, hey, this is like, let's do more butter over gun barrels, should we say. So I think that's one issue that's going to create complications in terms of Taiwan's ability to approach Beijing with confidence. One other issue that comes to mind also is about how Lai Ching-te, I think he has a certain image that I think many commentators refer to, that they call him well, actually he mentioned himself that he once called himself about around 2017, when he called himself a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence. I think ever since then, he's underscored that the key word there in that line is pragmatic. And indeed, in that sense speech, he's added quite a number of other things, e.g. that he's committed to the ROC constitution, essentially the status quo, and that he's any change to the status quo will have to come through in the manifestation of the popular will of the Taiwanese people, and most likely in the form of a popular referendum, i.e., if any change were to happen, even were Lai Ching-te to be in power, he's not going to be the one who calls the shot, who makes a decision. It's going to be the Taiwanese people, and who can be against the will of the people, right? So essentially, it's outsourcing that politically problematic issue in a way in Beijing's eyes. So really, I think, however, in spite of all those nuances he added back then, the pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence is a label, the bumper sticker, if you will, that's stuck. And Beijing has certainly been using it to be giving Lai Ching-te a relatively difficult time. And so Lai really, in that sense, if engagement, if a conciliatory approach towards Beijing is what Lai Ching-te want to pursue, then he has some more work that remains to be done. I think, just to give you an example, and do stop me if I'm going too long on this one single question, but to give you an example, there were some soothing bombs, some consolation prizes that for example, previous President Tsai used to give to Beijing that we're not seeing as much of from the Lai speech today. So, for example, 8 years ago, same deal, Beijing would ask President Tsai to endorse the 1992 consensus, which manifests the One China principle. It was a no-go for any DPP government, honestly. So President Tsai 8 years ago did not endorse the 92 consensus nor the One China principle. However, she gave a consolation prize. She said, let's work together based on the spirit of 1992. Or let's treasure and preserve the subtle understandings that both sides have strived towards reaching around the 1992 talks. Those are kind of things that are soothing bombs in a sense, or at least consolation prizes that President Tsai used to dish out. We haven't seen as much coming out of Lai recently. So I think it remains to be seen at this point in the coming months, whether Lai will try to do something to the similar effect. And if so, whether that pragmatic work for a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence bumper sticker will still remain as big a problem as it has been.
Thanks, Wenty. And just a really quick follow-up. I'm wondering whether you think, from Beijing's perspective, they see Lai as a fundamentally different how they see him as fundamentally different from Tsai, and how that might play into the relations over the next 4 years.
Yes, so I think Beijing probably give Lai Ching-te even less benefit of the doubt than Beijing used to give to President Tsai. And obviously, Taiwan domestic politics is going to be very complicated. But if I were to oversimplify it, one could argue that DPP may be made of two broad wings, so to speak. There's the more progressive wing of the party, and there's the more Taiwanese national wing of the party. The stereotype is that Lai come from more national wing of the party, whereas President Tsai come from the more progressive wing. And therefore, people will point to data points such as how Taiwan was able to legalize the push for same-sex marriage around 2019 under President Tsai's reign. So again, going to be a gross oversimplification, but I think that's a general stereotype. So that's also one reason why also that Beijing may be harboring some suspicion about what this Lai really think is heart of hearts. But then again, like I wrote about in a recent piece for the New Atlanticist for the Atlantic Council, that bumper sticker as pragmatic pursuit or as a national wing figure, that could be a liability in working with Beijing, but it could also be an asset. So precisely because Lai may be pursued as more of a favorite son of the national wing of the DPP, that also means, however, while it attracts more suspicion from Beijing, it also attracts Lai more trust from the national wing of the party, and therefore from the most Beijing skeptical part of Taiwan. So if Beijing were willing to work with Lai Ching-te, that could actually mean that Lai will be able to have much more room to maneuver in terms of negotiating with Beijing. And if they were ever to sign anything, Lai's ability to have any agreement ratified or endorsed domestically would be greater than any president in a long time. So really, it could be a liability, but it could also be an asset. So it really down to Beijing about how high a priority that really places on meaningful cross-strait stabilization and progress.
Thanks, Wen-Ti. And turning to Liz now, I wanted to ask a little bit more about Taiwan and the international space. So as we know, Taiwan has a diminishing presence in the international community in recent years. Almost as soon as Lai was elected, Nauru switched its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China. Within a space of days, they now have around I want to say 12. I hope I'm not wrong. Diplomatic allies. We also saw a lot of consternation over a potential switch by Tuvalu earlier this year. And Taiwan is experiencing this not just in diplomatic recognition, but across a lot of other arenas in international cooperation. So I'm curious, how should we view the trajectory of Taiwan's shrinking international space, and what Lai will be looking at in the next 4 years?
It does appear that the natural trajectory is countries jettisoning Taiwan for China, for the PRC. So I do anticipate that there will be some switching under the Lai administration. You look at the major powers and the major economies in the world, and they have official diplomatic relations with the PRC, not with Taiwan. So unfortunately for Taiwan, there does seem to be this pull to China for various, reasons that I think most of us know about, economic power and hedging one's bets. And then there's Taiwan that, does have shrinking international space. Now, of course, the Tsai administration was very effective at expanding unofficial ties. And those should not be, poo-pooed or, discounted, because the reality is, again, the major powers all have official ties with Beijing. So does that leave Taiwan out in the cold? No, that means Taiwan can still have, of course, extremely robust economic relations, social, cultural, educational, relations with other countries. And the more that Taiwan can expand its unofficial diplomatic space, of course, the stronger that makes Taiwan. People like Taiwan. My gosh, like look at the US administration. You have the top presidential contenders both trying to prove themselves to be the toughest on China, right? A lot of countries are like that as well. And so we've seen that, China's approval rating, worldwide has really plummeted. Most, it was 80%, of Americans do not like China. I had a Fulbright over in Europe right before and during COVID. And, when I was writing my proposal, most of the countries in Europe liked China. I was going to do a lot of research on Europe, China relations. Well, especially after COVID, those views of China plummeted. However, views of Taiwan have gone up tremendously. And Taiwan now has more sister city relationships, those unofficial, types exchanges than ever before. So I think that's really where the Lai administration is going to work. It has an uphill battle in the UN and its associated bodies. The UN is nearly in China's pocket, if we can be honest. And so wherever the US can support Taiwan and international organizations that are perhaps not associated with the UN really needs to help Taiwan out there. And that's the golden spot where Taiwan really needs to put its efforts, is in those associations that are perhaps not associated with the UN.
Thanks, Liz. And just a really quick follow-up. I'm curious how you see Lai as a diplomat compared to Tsai.
Lai does not have as much international experience, and that is perhaps, one of the reasons why he brought on, or at least, the party brought on Bi Kim Xiao. She has, very good relations, of course, not just with Washington, but she was in Europe, not long ago. So she has very, very good international relations credentials. Also, if you look at the Lai administration, it's a lot of the foreign policy people, just in different positions. Joseph Wu is staying on, but not as, Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is now the National Security Council chief. Wellington Koo is now, Minister of Defense. There are a number of people, Lin Jialong doesn't necessarily have a lengthy or doesn't have a lot of deep, diplomatic experience, but he's close to Lai. And so part of it is, the team. How effective can this team be in its diplomatic initiatives with countries?
Thanks, Liz. And turning to Lev again, Lev, I wanted to ask briefly, and I know he covered some of this in his speech today, but it's very quick to turn around much of an analysis on that. But I wanted to ask briefly how we should be looking at Taiwan's economic relationships, just regionally as well as internationally. What are the big factors that Lai will be looking to tackle in this term?
I think the decades hopeful and hopefully eventually realized bilateral trade agreement between Taiwan and the United States, which talks have been going on for quite some time. I mean, it feels crazy to think back to the great ractopamine scandal of the Tsai administration, where she allowed ractopamine-treated pork to be sold in Taiwan for the sake of being able to begin a dialogue about a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. And it's now 2024, and we're still on early rounds of negotiations with some sort of trade agreement. I know everyone in Taiwan is incredibly hopeful to eventually get double taxation removed, and there's been rumors that that's going away, but it still hasn't happened. So I think these are some of the biggest issues that I think both people in Taiwan and outside of Taiwan are going to be very hopeful for. As others have already commented on, I think we're going to see a pursuit of more robust economic relationships with Taiwan's newfound allies in Eastern Europe, as well as the rest of the world that Tsai has begun to build off of, especially during COVID with a lot of, the Taiwan Can Help campaign. Even though it's not an international issue, it's worth focusing a second on domestic economic policy, because if there's something that most Taiwanese voters who did not vote for Lai and say voted for Ko-en-je in the 2020 election were aggrieved by the DPP for, was because of a lack of economic policy that domestically was felt by the average Taiwanese person. And that's not something that was really relevant in Lai's speech today, even though he paid lip service to, we need to do something about wages, we need to do something about employment, and we need to do something about the rising cost of housing. There really weren't any concrete proposals in his speech about what exactly he would like to do himself as president. And that was really, I think, if there was one shortcoming that I thought was particularly obvious for me, it was kind of a lack of meaningful domestic economic policy proposals that spoke to that very large and vocal aggrieved body of Taiwanese voters. And that's something that I think he needs to be careful of, especially given the status of the Legislative Yuan.
Thanks, Lev. And of course, it's impossible to talk about Taiwan's economy without mentioning semiconductors. So I have a question for Wen-Ti here. When we talk about, Taiwan's economic place, they make around, I believe it's 70% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the high-end semiconductors. I mean, what's Taiwan's future as a cog in that high-end technology value chain? What would be the key ideas that Lai would be thinking about here as he steps into the presidency in terms of the semiconductor industry there?
Yeah, I mean, Lai basically talked about semiconductor as well in his inaugural address. Essentially, he's trying to say that Taiwan, well, pillar 2 of his speech, actually, he talked about pillar 2 of peace when he talked about how economic security is also national security. Also part of his speech, he also talks about how Taiwan's place in the global supply chain for semiconductor and other higher end technology sectors is one meaningful safeguard for Taiwan's security as well. So as part and parcel of that, I think Taiwan is going to continue to commit itself to the broader friendshoring approach, as we've been seeing. We see Taiwan begin to share the semiconductor industries. I believe they established a factory in Arizona. They are doing one in Germany, in Japan as well. Again, some in Taiwan harbor suspicions about it. Some people be saying, if Taiwan's claim to semiconductor prowess is one reason, one way why Taiwan is indispensable, then Taiwan cannot get a silicon shield out of it, that people cannot live without it, therefore they cannot let it fall. However, there's one other way to look at it as well. I think Taiwan government is a lot more proactive in looking at this issue when they're like, well, if Taiwan spreads their wings of the semiconductor industry and establish their presence in other friendly countries, they will be able to further integrate themselves into the local society, local economy, and therefore over time, not only is more people-to-people exchange a meaningful soft power exercise, but also it's going to help build out more locally based constituencies in those friendly countries in which TSMC has an increasingly presence. That's going to go some way as well into the helping supposedly friendly government, including friendly governments, political leaders who have those constituencies to work with to help Taiwan as well. So I think in that sense, economic engagement is a soft power building exercise as well, which may get those countries to help Taiwan. So longer term game, I suppose. But again, that's, I think, one reason why Taiwan's place in the global economy today is so interesting.
Thanks, Wen-Ti. I mean, you bring up, the friendshoring, and that's something I wanted to also ask Liz about. Looking at Taiwan's greater role in securing supply chains, I mean, how should we be looking at Taiwan's potential future as a friendshoring destination? A destination for countries, including the US, to reduce economic reliance on Beijing. I mean, what's the extent of the role that they can play there, given their security situation and their political situation?
Well, there are reasonable prospects for Taiwan to grow as a friendshoring destination for businesses, and certainly there's a definite need for it, on Taiwan. Particularly, let's first talk about technology industries such as computer chips, electronics. Those industries, they don't exist in a vacuum, right? Even TSMC, gets, designed, from the United States. Netherlands, Japan make the chip making equipment. So there's a lot of bits and pieces from other countries that go into TSMC, and TSMC cannot function, without close international collaboration with leading companies and suppliers from other countries. And so there's certainly an opportunity for those businesses, to friendshore on Taiwan. Taiwan, as we know, excels at math education and what we in the US call like STEM, education, science, technology. And so Taiwan would certainly also benefit from an influx of talent and investment. Couple that with their education system, and Taiwan can do, amazing things. Right now, there are some barriers to entry to foreign countries and foreign businesses from foreign countries. Those need to be lowered. I'm sure Lai administration is, well aware of those, as well as the double taxation problem. That's an issue. But also, there's incredible need for friendshoring, on Taiwan. The more foreign investment, the more foreign talent, the more foreign involvement in Taiwan, honestly, the more secure Taiwan is. If Taiwan, it's maybe a bit of a stretch to say if Taiwan is more akin to like a Singapore, China is less likely to attack it. At least, that's one mentality. Those who say, Taiwan needs to move its own industries, out of Taiwan for its safety, airlift, those industries out of Taiwan, are actually leaving Taiwan more vulnerable. And so, I was looking at an AmCham, a very recent AmCham report about, business sentiment on Taiwan, and the businesses that are there now, actually 92% of them expect to expand at least in human capital terms, right? And so, and the Taiwan companies that have left China because of, various factors, they've relocated to Taiwan for the most part. They haven't gone like to Mexico. They haven't abandoned Taiwan and gone elsewhere after leaving China. And so, and even, in a poll of businesses in Taiwan that AmCham did, when it talked about, uncertainty, like, was there enough uncertainty in Taiwan to make these companies think twice about continuing operating there or leaving? More than 92% said they were going to, stay for the long haul. And so, the United States and foreign businesses really do need to look seriously at friendshoring on Taiwan as a way of supporting, Taiwan. We know that if Taiwan falls to, China's clutches, that's not just going to be bad for Taiwan, it's going to be bad for the United States and for the West. China has made it very, very clear that its agenda is to displace the United States as a global power. And, taking Taiwan is part of that agenda. So that's a step. The legislation is there, right? It conveys the sense of Congress, that Congress has Taiwan's back. And Biden administration, if it continues, after, January of next year, is pretty clearly committed to the security of Taiwan's national, defense. Trump administration, I think that if you push Trump's hand, as Congress has done for previous presidents, that he will also defend Taiwan because he is, and I'm not necessarily militarily, I don't know there, but I'm saying that will, defend Taiwan's democracy because it's not China. We don't know in January if there's going to be a Democratic House. There's a possibility we'll have, Trump as president, but a Democratic House and the Senate, I don't know. So we would have divided government, which would honestly, I think, be in Taiwan's favor, because it would really, really, I think, support Taiwan.
Thanks, Liz. And we're going to go to questions shortly. I have one more question for our panelists, but we're going to go to questions shortly. So just a reminder that if you want to submit a question, please go to askac.org. And finally, and I might throw this one to Wendy, what are the specific defense challenges that Taiwan is going to face in the coming years? And I'm curious to hear about it within the context of the changing China-US relationship and how things like these the flights near Taiwan and patrols have changed as that relationship has changed.
Yes, structurally, one major issue, of course, is going to be continue securing working to defend relations with the U.S. for sure. And one other issue related to parliamentary divisions is that there are elements of defense and security cooperation that require sometimes a level of confidentiality. And sometimes when the government and legislature are run by different parties, when naturally the legislature want greater oversight, want greater transparency, so they have leverage to do the work. Those trade-off inevitably between transparency and confidentiality may sometimes pose a challenge to the timeliness of some of U.S.-Taiwan defense and security cooperation items. I think that's one factor. The other one factor you mentioned about on a more cross-strait basis, yeah, I mean, it's the risk of accidental escalation militarily. I think those are increasing by the day. With every PLA military jets that flies near Taiwan, with every PLA warships that sail to waters near Taiwan, including near Taiwan's offshore islands, that creates a political pressure for Taiwan as well as other like-minded friends and partners to engage in probably not comparable, but in engaging in other actions, deployment of their own military assets in the vicinity to show that those are not entirely Chinese jurisdictions to move like that militarily. And we see this, of course, you could have a warning shot going wrong, flying astray, and then somebody may get hurt at some point. That's one factor. One other factor is that we're also seeing expansion of the way that China uses their gray zone security maneuvers. We're seeing them moving away from just purely military assets deployments. They're moving towards paramilitary, and when there's a civilian adjacent, by that I mean law enforcement, China's Coast Guards, for example, they're operating near waters near Taiwan's offshore islands. So you're increasingly blurring the line between military behavior and civilian sphere, and with the more diversity, more complexity of people, assets, and sectors that's got involved in this game of chicken started by China, there's even more risk that things can go accidentally wrong. So I think those are issues that we should be watching out for.
Thanks, Wendy. Certainly an issue that, as we've seen, that can turn on a dime. So I'm going to turn to some questions now for our panelists. Our first one is from Fred, and I think I'm going to direct this one at Lev. He says, thank you for organizing the event. I attended a Hoover event a few years ago, which focused on the economic relationship between China and Taiwan. It changed during different times between different Taiwanese regimes. So if the executive and legislative branches have different heads, how is this going to affect the economic relationship between the two countries? And if the new Taiwanese government wants to keep good relationship with similar democracies, it will be tough because some of those countries do not belong to the side of China in the world of politics. Lev, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So something that was novel about Joe Biden's election was that it was the first time that the DPP has been in power in Taiwan while a Democratic Party has been in power in the United States. Just from electoral outcomes, coincidentally, I like to think that there's not a grand conspiracy that made this happen. In the past, it was always if there was a Republican Party in power, the DPP was in power, and if there was a Democratic Party in power, the KMT was in power. So the last 4 years have actually been a bit of a new ground for U.S.-Taiwan relations, because it's the first time we've seen a Democratic president with a DPP president. And I think people here in Taiwan have always had this skepticism of the Democratic Party because Republicans are more vocal on Taiwan, although that doesn't actually mean that Democrats don't care. We know that Democrats and Republicans historically have always supported Taiwan bipartisanly. Every bill that's ever passed has been bipartisan. And especially after the Nancy Pelosi visit, we really saw a huge uptick in vocal support for Democrats in Taiwan than we had really ever seen before. I like to make the joke that Taiwan is the only place in the world where Mike Pompeo and Nancy Pelosi are both dearly loved because of how bipartisanship has managed to exist in Taiwan. And so, you know, That's because I think in a large part of a lot of diplomatic efforts by Taiwan to make sure that they have good relations with both parties. The Taiwanese diplomats, especially those like Xiaobin Kim, work extremely hard to make sure that they are on good terms with all political actors in whatever country they are having to work with. And I think the biggest challenge has been in the past that countries are very unsure about how to navigate relations with Taiwan in a way that does not come at the expense of their relationship with the PRC. And I think Taiwan going forward has gotten very good at being able to offer countries a lot without crossing that red line. I think, a lot of what Tsai had done, especially during COVID, was to frame Taiwan as a global leader, regardless of China. The whole Taiwan Can Help campaign wasn't focused on the PRC. It was simply focused on how Taiwan can be a goodwill actor. And I think that was extremely helpful for countries who may feel skeptical to work with Taiwan to see that Taiwan isn't trying to inherently mess with their relationship with China, but is just trying to be another good global citizen.
Thanks, Lev. And to our next question, it's a very straightforward question, the kind of question an annoying journalist like myself might ask. So I'm going to direct this one at Liz. If a Trump presidency returns, the US-China relationship may worsen, but if Biden remains as POTUS, US-Russia relationship may worsen, which may affect the US-China relationship. So which presidency is better for the China-Taiwan relationship?
Yeah, this one's putting a new wrinkle in my brain. Certainly, no matter who comes in November, the U.S.-Russia relationship is going to, worsen. Of course, China now has a very special relationship with Russia. So now we've got some really interesting triangulation, going on there. Again, some of this comes down to the diplomatic team. If Trump comes in, as Lev, had mentioned, Pottinger is out. Like, who's going to be in his team? And I can anticipate, a couple of people who are likely to be on that team, and they are very critical of China. So I think that as U.S. relationship with China, either stays the same or deteriorates, I don't see it getting a lot better. I think that is problematic for Taiwan. I mean, what Taiwan and what the region really needs is like some stability, right? Even like businesses want to know, the stock market, likes predictability, stability. And I think there's so many balls in the air with who's coming into the White House, who's going to, form the majority in the Senate, who's going to be the Senate, but more so the House, who's going to be Speaker of the House, who's going to be the foreign relations team. All of that is unknown right now. And so, there's too much, I think, uncertainty to be able to answer this question honestly. I think that the ball is more in Taiwan's and China's court. I think that, Lai very clearly stating that Taiwan is not subordinate to Beijing. Beijing is always like, oh, Taiwan's our little brother, all one family kind of thing. It's like, nah, we don't want to be a little brother, right? We're not subordinate to you. However, we do want to talk. I think that's extremely important, that the ball is in, Taiwan's court, and that it is continuously expressing a willingness to engage. You know what? Forget the official level of politics. Let's look at what's going on. Like, the public never even hears about, some delegation, unofficial delegation that went over. For goodness sakes, we've got Wellington Koo back in office. How many centuries later here, right? And so, like, I think what's going to happen under the radar is probably more important, because unfortunately, these people running the show, they're politicians, right? And they're hogging the spotlight, and they're getting out there, and I'm tough, and I'm this and that, and I'm tough on China. I defend, Taiwan, and I go there and I get a great banquet. Isn't that great? But, it's more those unofficial delegations that going over quietly that we hear about, like maybe 2 weeks, a month later. I think that's where the real activity is going to be. And that's where it's really important the United States, Taiwan, and China meet.
Thanks, Liz. And we have space for just one more brief question, and I'm going to, again, on defense, I'm going to direct this at Wenty. What's your view of the trade-off between US military assistance of Ukraine and Israel versus Taiwan? Does the United States have enough resources to support security in all three regions? If not, how should the US balance all of these priorities?
Right. I mean, you balance priority as the way people always do, which is you rank them by importance and urgency. And whichever one is important and urgent, you go there first. So I think it's how you see this in how Lai Ching-te approaches as well in his inaugural address, when he's basically like, he sees Taiwan as the quote unquote spotlight in the global chain of democracies, unquote. So I think in that sense, he's making a clear statement in terms of Taiwan's decision to align itself with democratic camps internationally. You see that also that Taiwan wants, as they used to do under Tsai Ing-wen, who always talk about being predictable and pragmatic, you're going to see Taiwan under Lai trying to play the role of an understanding partner as well to US and other like-minded countries, in a sense that Taiwan understands that Taiwan's security depends not only on its own defense, not only on its economic importance to the world, but also rests in part on Taiwan's soft power, which is ultimately anchored on Taiwan's own democratic values. So in that sense, what's good for other democracies around the world is going to be good for the longer term cohesions for the democratic camp in the aggregate, and therefore better for the sustainability of longer term support for Taiwan itself as well. So in that sense, I think Taiwan sees the interdependence between the security of itself and other democracies around the world. So in that sense, I think Taiwan also will try to tell people, Taiwan doesn't even actually have to tell people. Xi Jinping told us when Xi Jinping talked with Biden, right? That Taiwan Strait, so-called plan to invade Taiwan by 2027 or 2035. Xi Jinping didn't know where Biden heard from, but Xi Jinping didn't see such proposal from his own subordinates. So in that sense, while Taiwan security is an important issue for sure, the stakes are high, the urgency level may not be the highest among democracies in need of support at this juncture. So in that sense, being a longer-term sustainable understanding friend, Taiwan will not have much problem in terms of US providing support to perhaps other friends in the meantime, and come back to Taiwan, not necessarily afterwards, but doesn't have to make Taiwan the highest or singular priority at this juncture. I think that's what friends do, that when you are in need, I try not to be too demanding on you at this juncture.